Yeah, where I've seen that really play out for me, and I encourage the people that I work with not to do this, is in partnerships. I'm of the opinion, having had a partner in my early part of my career, that everything's all good and it's comfortable and you feel good about it until money gets made. When everyone's struggling, it's easy to have a partnership. When money gets made, now it's, I do more work than he does and he doesn't. He took more days off than I do, and you get all of those things. And so I have seen that fall apart more times than I have seen it work in a partnership environment. And when they split the contract that they put together at the beginning, if it was a handshake agreement between a couple of buddies over a beer, that thing's going to get ugly. If there's a contract written up with the detail that you're talking about, some time was put into it, it doesn't mean that split won't be ugly. It just means it'll be less ugly.
No, it's true. I mean, obviously a large, I do a lot of litigation, so a large part of my practice are, business divorces. It's just a general term for, when businesses implode, explode, whatever you want to call it. Nobody goes into business saying that I want to hate the guy who I'm in business with, or I'm going to get in a dispute with the guy that I'm in business with. They always go in business because they're optimistic, they want to make money or whatever. But the reality is that just like there's a high percentage of, marital divorces, there's a high percentage of business divorces too, where people just don't want to be in business together anymore, whether it's because they're making too much money and, whatever, or they're making too little money, or all of a sudden I wake up one day and I don't like you anymore, or you wake up and you don't like me, or I want to go do something else and I want to get out of this business. So if you don't have, just like going back to the written business plan, if you don't have the next step in that process of governing documents for your business once you start your business, whether it's a corporation, LLC, or partnership, you're going to have problems. Because if you have no contract, then, like, for instance, I'm in Florida, so we're going to have to go look at the Florida LLC code or the Florida corporations code, and that's going to interpret what our relationship was legally and who gets what and how we split it up and do whatever. And that's probably not what we were thinking, but that's what's going to happen because we didn't have it memorialized somewhere. Or if you have a crappy contract, it's going to be pretty much the same thing. Whatever's not covered in that contract is going to be filled in with what the default law says. And you may not like what the default law says because it'd be very punitive and very costly. Versus if you just had it in your agreement to begin with, it's just like any other contract. It says what's going to happen if we're going to break up. Here's the roadmap of how it's going to happen, how we go from step A to B to all the way to Z. And if there's any problems, here's how it's fixed, and here's who pays for what, and it's all contained. So, do we follow that plan? Sometimes people do, and they just go through the contract and they dissolve their LLC or their corporation, or they transfer out or whatever. Or sometimes, people file lawsuits. And then if you file a lawsuit, the court is going to look at what's the governing document say. And if it says, you do A to Z, then they do A to Z, and that's it. But if that's missing, like I said, you're going to have to fill in those holes, and you're not going to like what happens. And it's going to be much more time consuming and costly than if you would have preemptively just drafted a good document to begin with and had that in place.
Yeah, there's almost like an emotional block to people who start businesses, particularly partnerships, but anybody, that they're so excited about going out and doing this thing that they're putting together. And are we really going to do it? That it almost feels like you're trying to draft a prenup, right? Well, if you really love me, then why do we need a prenup? And if this is forever, why do we need these things? And everything is rosy and beautiful and it's going to work. And this is great. We're young and we're energetic. And it almost seems like we don't want to do that, get down and have those real adult conversations, I call them, that will save time, that will save just an immense amount over time. So I guess the message that I want people to hear, what you're saying, is how important this is. And just take that time out. Doesn't mean you hate each other. It doesn't mean anything other than you are protecting each other in the event that the thing that is going to inevitably happen, I think, because I think it happens a whole lot more than it doesn't, is memorialized, to your point, somewhere, and it makes that pain a little less painless. I agree. For the first time guy that is getting, well, I was baptized by fire. I I was approached by a group. I was running a company in Portland for the owner. I was approached by a group in Portland, Oregon. I was 28 years old to come and start a business, and I was going to be the operating side of it and bring in all the business, and they were the financing. And I ran it up to $3 million in the first year, and they didn't have the money that they said they did. A little thing about cash flow got kicked in. That's where I learned how cash flow works, and they fired me. 17 days later, I went and started my own, and all of the customers that I had moved from company one that I had worked out for years to come to the new company, I then went and got and brought to my new company a year later. So they sued me. And I remember exactly, I'd never been sued before. I didn't really have a sense other than Perry Mason on television, what that even meant. And they sued me. And I remember, I've told the story many times, I remember getting that lawsuit. I was sitting in a Kroger's parking lot, and I opened it up, and it's, an inch thick. And as I read it, I was like, this was from them, and this was their suit. And as I read it, I was like, oh, I'm guilty. I don't want to read this because I'm guilty. It's written in such a way that you're like, I'm guilty. And I called my attorney right away, and I was all new to attorneys. And I remember him saying, no, man, we're going to craft our response and just relax. And a few days later, the response comes out, and I get that response, and I'm like, those sons of bitches, right? They did it. I told you they did it. So there's this kind of idea of how these things work. And then there is the practical reality of how these things work. So for someone who is sued for the first time, what should they do short of calling their attorney in the first, few days, and kind of their perspective on that first lawsuit? I think there's everyone's going to freak out and think the world's ending. Give us some sense of reality there in those early days.
Sure. Well, the first thing is take it seriously, which, believe it or not, a lot of people don't, which I don't get, but have the correct mindset once you get hit with a lawsuit of it's a very serious matter. It's not the end of your life. Don't obsess over it, even though it's a huge issue and it's affecting you mentally or whatever. You have to try as best as possible to compartmentalize it and just think of it as part of the business process in your business, but you can't ignore it. You can't throw it, underneath the couch in the living room and hope it goes away or whatever. It's real and it's happening. So a lot of people don't take it seriously, believe it or not. And that's the first thing. The second thing is, submit it to your insurance company ASAP, because a lot of lawsuits, business lawsuits or whatever, if you have liability coverage, professional liability, certain things are covered by insurance, and people don't really think about that or are in that mindset when they're first served with a lawsuit. And then they go and they get an attorney, and then the attorney gets involved, and then they do a bunch of work, and then they figure out, oh, there's insurance coverage. And then guess what? You're not going to recoup that money that you had to pay that attorney once your insurance company comes in anyways. So my second thing I would say is see if there's insurance coverage before anything, but make sure, you do that ASAP and make sure there's a yes or no answer. If yes, then you got to meet. You have insurance defense counsel is going to come in and handle the case. If no, then you have to go, notify your attorney anyways once you get sued that you're, shot, going to see if there's insurance coverage or not, so it goes on their radar. But if there's no insurance coverage, then your attorney's going to have to handle it. And then obviously make sure that your attorney actually does litigation and isn't just a transactional attorney, because that's going to turn out real bad for you. So make sure that if your business attorney doesn't do litigation, make sure that they refer you to an attorney who actually does litigation, not dabbles in litigation, but focuses on business law litigation. And, then you go from there. You're going to put together a defense to your lawsuit. You're going to put together maybe a counterclaim to your lawsuit, and you're going to put together a plan where you're going to work with the attorney. You're the business person. We're going to make good business decisions for your business. So maybe it's worth trying to settle this case earlier and conserve money, or maybe the other side is so far apart that it's just, we got no choice but to litigate. But you want to constantly have these conversations with your attorney the whole time, and you want to make sure that at every step of the way, as the business owner, the entrepreneur, the startup person, whatever, that you're making routine good business decisions at every step of being involved in a lawsuit. You don't want to get emotional. You don't want to get obsessed. even though I know it's easier said than done, because a lot of people it really weighs on their head. I mean, I've had clients where, I mean, they're beyond obsessed with being involved in a lawsuit. I mean, it's fanatical that they're involved in a lawsuit. And as easy as it is for me to say, you have to, like I said earlier, compartmentalize that and just remember it's part of the business process. It's an offshoot of being in business. It's going to happen probably at some point in your business career. So it's not, it may be personal if there's some animosity between you and your former partner or your former business affiliate or someone who you were in business with, but you know, it's a business thing. So, you know, at the end of the night, it's a fight over, you know, not performing under a contract, not paying something, owing someone, whatever. You're gonna, at the end of the night, if you lose the case or whatever, you're gonna go home, you're gonna be able to sleep in your bed at night. No one's gonna come and take you away to jail or, you know, something like that. So you always have to put in perspective that it's just a fight over money and assets and things like that. It's not over your liberty or your freedom. So, you know, a lot of people have really weird misconceptions about lawsuits or whatever. So, you know, you have to get in the right mindset and the mentality and then just address it and make sure, like I said, you're making good decisions throughout.
Yeah, that's a really good point that I think entrepreneurs should hear coming into it. That if you are running your own business, it's not if, it's when, and so the inevitable is going to happen, and you just have to look at it the same way you would all of the other slings and arrows and sacrifices that you make and risks that you take and you know, the vagaries of running a business from a day to day. It's kind of built into that, and if you get your head around that before rather than after and treat it just like you said, with the importance it deserves, but don't obsess over it. I found it to be much easier for me. It was a natural thing though, because it started so early on that first deal, and it was just, you know, I learned early on what the realities of it were. And having said that, it brings me to my next question, which is when I had drivers for years and years, and forever they were employees, and then they ended up being independent contractors. Long story short, as I flipped into independent contractors, a small attorney in the city sued me, got somebody to come with, one of my employees to come with her, and said I didn't pay them correctly. And I was like, I know I paid you correctly. I ended up fighting that one out. This has been 20 years ago, 25 years ago. I ended up fighting that one out because I was right. And I spent, I don't know, $100,000 to prove that I was right. In the end, the judge saw it for me, but didn't give me fees. So I was out $100,000. So, you know, theoretically, I won. I learned a very important lesson that day, which is I ended up getting a bunch of those from that same attorney. She just went and got more and more people to sign. And I don't know, probably averaged $12,000 to settle those things without having to prove that I was right. And ultimately, those all went away. So a very important lesson I learned, the difference between a lawsuit that's annoying and one that might be an existential issue for a business. From your perspective, talk to me about, that's I guess a real world example. From your side, what's the difference between one or the other, an annoying lawsuit or an existential one?
You know, believe it or not, the lines are blurred between both because, you know, there's a little bit of reality in almost all lawsuits. There's maybe a scintilla of reality, and there's always part existentialism in all lawsuits. So it's a mix of both. I mean, it goes back to making good business decisions. So, you know, if you're the defendant in a lawsuit, you're in a money losing situation, no matter how well it turns out for you. It is a money losing situation because not only is it costing you money for attorney's fees and whatever damages you're going to be found or whatever, but it's taking time away from you focusing on your business making money. So you want to make the best possible smart business decision to extricate yourself from that lawsuit to cost you the least amount of money. So it doesn't matter if you're vindicated or not, or, you know, you're right or you're wrong. What's going to cost you the least amount of time and money to get out of that lawsuit? Sometimes it's, you know, pay some blood money and settle the case at some point in time, short of trial or whatever. Sometimes the plaintiff could be a maniac and doesn't want to settle and wants a preposterous amount of money for whatever. And sometimes you have to go to trial and, go all the way and maybe have an appeal or whatever. So, the nuisance lawsuit, the real lawsuit, it doesn't matter, like the different cliches. I mean, a rusty knife will kill you just as much as a regular knife. It's the same thing with the lawsuit. A frivolous lawsuit, unless defended correctly or whatever, can do as much damage as a legitimate lawsuit against you. So it's just a matter of, if you're the defendant, make good decisions to figure out how to extricate yourself out of that situation for as little time and money as possible. And if you're the plaintiff, make sure that you have realistic goals of what it is you want to accomplish with your lawsuit, and you'll be able to accomplish them. If someone owes you a bunch of money and they don't have any money, your lawsuit is going to be meaningless if you get a paper judgment, particularly in a state here like Florida, where we are, a debtor's paradise, where, people go hide out from judgment creditors all over the world in Florida. So if someone owes you, let's say, I'll just give you a hypothetical. Let's say someone owes you $100,000. Okay. And, if you go through all the steps and you sue them and you go to trial and you win a trial, whatever, you get the right to try to collect $100,000 from them. And in a place like Florida, it's hard to collect $100,000 from a business that's, smart and does things with their assets, and an individual that's smart and does things with their assets. However, let's say during the course of that lawsuit or whatever, the person offers you, $50,000 to go away. All right. There's something to be said where you're in, just like when you're the defendant, sometimes when you're the plaintiff in a lawsuit, you're in a money losing situation, no matter how well it turns out. There's something to be said where if someone hands you $50,000 immediately and you're done, versus years from now, you're going to get the right to try to collect $100,000. It comes back to making a good business decision, because that $50,000 handed to you easily, you're going to get back, get back in business. You're not going to be spending attorney's fees. You're not going to be spending time. You're not going to be doing whatever. There is something to be said, and there's a value, and you want to talk about value of money over time. There's a value to doing that early than there is to doing it late. So it comes back to, existentially, I want to be vindicated. This person owes me $100,000, dead to rights, versus, how am I going to get that money back? So, a practical consequence is you're going to get that money back if you settle and they agree to pay, versus an existential question or an existential kind of result where I went and I got a judgment for the full amount, my attorney's fees, my costs, whatever, and I collected nothing. So, it's a little bit of both when you're evaluating lawsuits from both sides, from plaintiff and defendant side.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. And back to our emotional state, when we start the business and the partners and doing it right and getting the paperwork done and the reluctance to do that. The flip side to that, or in addition to that, I would say I counsel business owners all of the time that this is an unemotional endeavor. There's no emotion. It's hard to make money when you are acting on emotion. And so when someone gets one of these lawsuits, nuisance or otherwise, the reality is just try to get out of it, right or wrong. And it's very hard because, again, my generation grew up watching, Perry Mason come in and fix everything, in the span of 45 minutes, and it was all made right. And we're used to seeing these things on television, and the uninitiated may not understand what that reality is. And that's something that's very hard to do. What do you mean? He literally stole that money from me. Yeah, I know, but you got to let him have it, or it's going to cost you $100,000. And there's no guarantee that you're going to be able to go get it back. So you're going to spend the money that you lost. You might double your losses, and you were right, and you lost. So I think that my advice is to try to get yourself out of a lawsuit as fast as you can, generally speaking. Would you say that that is a prudent course of action, unless someone really wants to get out there and risk?
Yes. I mean, like I said, no matter what side you're on, particularly if you're the defendant, it's a time-losing and money-losing proposition. So you want to, extricate yourself from the money-losing proposition as soon as possible, if possible. Sometimes, like I said, you got no choice. But if you have a choice, make a good choice.
What's a legal issue? Is there one that comes to mind that you see that could have been avoided not with paperwork and not with contracts, but with just a simple conversation early on? Is there something that stands out in your head, having worked with entrepreneurs as much as you have, that just said, if some guys sat down and just kind of had this conversation at the beginning, X might have been avoided?
A lot of lawsuits, incidents, disputes that I'm involved with, I mean, a lot of them could just be resolved with communication between the parties and like objective communication and
Mm-hmm.
productive communication, not like I'm calling you up to, say I hate you and you're a bad guy, but like, putting the emotion aside and being like, look, we have a problem between us. Let's come up with a solution that both of us may not like, but we can live with. And I think that there's a lot of circumstances where before you bring in the attorneys or whatever and you have a lawsuit involved, particularly if it's two business affiliates or partners there's an issue or whatever, having like really frank, open, and truthful communication can avoid a lot of issues and a lot of business disputes.
Keep the friends out of it, keep the wives out of it, that sort of thing.
Just keep your nephew who's an attorney in a different state out of it. Just have a, you don't want to say heart to heart, but have like a real conversation, not, and it don't have like some stupid text conversation or some stupid email chain that are all going to be exhibits in a lawsuit later on. Like have like a real life meeting with someone, or even on Zoom or, Microsoft Teams or whatever. Like have like a real communication, like a back and forth dynamic communication with someone. If you're serious about trying to resolve a situation, don't resort to, passive technology, because the message is going to get lost in translation and you're just going to look stupid, because years from now, this text message that you erratically sent out is now going to be, a jury is going to have to interpret what you meant when, you said F off to the person or whatever late at night or whatever. So, a real practical conversation. Yeah, I would encourage before any client does it, if you have an avenue to try to resolve something before we have to come in and like, whatever, try to do it.